In his 1999 book Scattered Minds, Gabor Maté argues that if you have ADHD, it's because early childhood stress prevented you from developing the emotional cognitive capacities you need to thrive in our world. Further, since ADHD isn't just a biological disorder, but one with social and psychological roots, he argues that medication isn't the best or only way to treat your ADHD. Based on this perspective, he prescribes non-pharmaceutical treatments for both adults and children with ADHD and explains how society can prevent ADHD in future generations. Maté is an internationally renowned family doctor with expertise in childhood development and the impacts of trauma on health. He has professional and personal experience with ADHD. As a doctor, he treats patients with ADHD, and he and his children have ADHD diagnoses themselves. In this guide, we'll focus on three main ideas. Part 1. Understanding your ADHD brain. We'll explore what it feels like to have ADHD, the brain differences that contribute to ADHD symptoms, and the factors that led you to develop ADHD. Part 2. You can heal your ADHD. We'll explain how you can overcome your ADHD-related difficulties by nourishing your psychological and physical needs. We'll also discuss how you can help your child with ADHD flourish. Part 3. The future of ADHD. We'll discuss how society can prevent ADHD. In our commentary, we'll supplement Maté's ideas with more recent research on ADHD, discuss the benefits and pitfalls of the biopsychosocial perspective, and suggest concrete strategies to help you cope with ADHD. New section. Part 1. Understanding your ADHD brain. Maté says that ADHD, which stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is a neurodevelopmental condition. If you have ADHD, it's because your brain didn't develop typically and now works differently than other brains. Short form note, Maté refers to this condition as ADD, which stands for Attention Deficit Disorder, because he was working from an older edition of the DSM, the official handbook of mental health diagnoses. We're using ADHD instead because it's the currently accepted name for this condition. In this section, we'll help you understand your ADHD brain more fully. First, we'll explore what it feels like to have ADHD. Then, we'll explain why Maté says you have an ADHD brain and discuss the brain differences that contribute to ADHD symptoms. What it feels like to have ADHD. Maté explains that if you have ADHD, you experience at least 2 of 3 primary symptoms: difficulty with attention, difficulty with impulse control, and difficulty with stillness. You may also struggle with secondary symptoms, including difficulty with self-esteem and difficulty with relationships. Let's explore each. Short form note, ADHD symptoms can overlap with the symptoms of other disorders, like anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which leads some experts to believe that ADHD is sometimes misdiagnosed. Since no simple medical test, like a blood test or brain imaging, can be used to confirm your diagnosis with 100% certainty, mental health experts rely on the information you provide about your behavior and life history for accurate diagnoses. Difficulty with attention. If you have difficulty with attention, you're unable to focus on what you're doing unless you're already highly motivated to do it. For example, you might find it easy to get into the zone when you're working on a hobby, but feel unable to pay attention to activities you don't enjoy, like your taxes. Maté says that this can lead you to procrastinate on things you don't enjoy until the time crunch motivates you to focus and take action, which can stress you out and prevent you from achieving your goals. Short form note, girls and women with ADHD tend to struggle more with attention regulation than they do with the other symptoms of ADHD. Compared with hyperactivity and a lack of impulse control, inattentiveness can be subtle. For example, a teacher is less likely to take notice when a student is quietly daydreaming during class and more likely to notice that a student often gets up to talk to their friends in the middle of class. Experts believe that this contributes to the underdiagnosis of ADHD in girls and women. Difficulty with impulse control. If you have difficulty with impulse control, you act on your first instinct without thinking about the consequences of your actions. For example, Maté says that you might feel unable to stop yourself from frequently interrupting others instead of waiting your turn to speak. You may also feel like you have to do or get what you want right now, even if it's not in your best interest. Short form note, one serious consequence of a lack of impulse control is increased engagement in risky behaviors, like dangerous driving, substance abuse, unprotected sex, and even crime. Research suggests that people with ADHD are more likely to take risks like these because they're inclined to see the potential benefits of the behavior more clearly than the potential pitfalls. Difficulty with stillness. If you have difficulty with stillness, you simply can't tolerate inactivity, so you're always in motion. You may stay physically still for long periods of time, like when you're procrastinating on a work assignment, but that stillness isn't restful. The whole time, you're thinking about the other things you need to be doing. Maté says that this often presents as anxiety. You're not merely active, you're restless and worried. Short form note: the way this symptom manifests may change from childhood to adulthood. While children typically demonstrate physical hyperactivity, adults tend to exhibit mental hyperactivity. Some experts attribute this change to masking. As you grow up, you learn that physical hyperactivity is inappropriate, so you pretend to be calm on the outside, although your mind continues to race on the inside. Secondary ADHD symptoms. You may also have secondary symptoms like difficulty with self-esteem in relationships. Maté explains that you only experience these secondary symptoms because your primary symptoms adversely impact the way you interact with the world. You might have difficulty with self-esteem if your ADHD symptoms have interfered with your ability to achieve your goals. For example, Maté notes that difficulty with attention can contribute to poorer memory that may affect your performance at work and derail your career. Not doing as well as you'd like to may lead you to feel inadequate. Short form note: research suggests that the stigma associated with ADHD is one of the main drivers of low self-esteem in people with ADHD. Many people believe that ADHD isn't a legitimate diagnosis. They mistakenly attribute your symptoms to laziness or stupidity, which makes them highly critical of even your best efforts and more likely to reject you. To protect your self-esteem, dispel the stigma. Assertively educate the misinformed that ADHD is a real condition and how it truly affects you. You might have difficulty with relationships if your ADHD symptoms make it hard for you to follow social rules or meet others' standards. For example, Maté notes that difficulty with impulse control can result in emotional outbursts. In a conflict, you might say the first thing that comes to mind, even if it isn't kind or constructive, which intensifies the conflict and ultimately distances you from others. Short form note: even those without ADHD may struggle to keep their emotions in check. If you're prone to emotional outbursts, neuroscientist and psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett recommends 3 measures to increase your emotional control in her book, How Emotions Are Made. First, take good physical care of yourself. You're more likely to lose emotional control when you don't feel good. Second, improve your emotional granularity. If you can distinguish the fine differences between your many emotions, it'll be easier to understand your feelings and how to handle them. Third, recategorize your emotions. For example, you might reinterpret your anger about a conflict as enthusiasm to get on the same page as your partner. Why you have an ADHD brain. Recall that according to Maté, you experience ADHD symptoms because your brain developed atypically. Now, we'll explain why your brain developed atypically. First, we'll discuss Maté's biopsychosocial approach to the origins of ADHD. Then, we'll discuss how biological and social factors lead to the psychological symptoms associated with ADHD. The biopsychosocial approach to ADHD. Maté says that when he wrote this book, most experts believed that ADHD had exclusively biological origins. You'd only develop ADHD if you inherited the genes responsible for it. He argues that ADHD actually has biological, psychological, and social causes, and provides 2 justifications for a biopsychosocial approach to ADHD. Short form note: Maté doesn't use the term biopsychosocial, but his theory of ADHD aligns with the biopsychosocial model of health, a relatively new approach that considers how your biology, psychology, and social environment each contribute to your overall health. Experts have used this model for a variety of applications, especially in the mental health field. But other experts criticize the model, believing that it's too conceptually vague and lacking in scientific rigor. Maté's first argument for why ADHD can't be purely genetic is that genes are merely blueprints that tell your body how to organize itself. How your body expresses a given genetic trait as you grow up depends on environmental factors, the circumstances you live in. Short form note: the relative contributions of your genes and your environment to the development of a mental illness is commonly known as the diathesis stress model. According to this model, mental disorders like depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia develop in 2 steps. First, you're born with a genetic predisposition to the disorder, which you inherited from your family. Then, something stressful happens to you, which triggers the onset of symptoms. Mate also argues that when interpreted correctly, research supports the view that ADHD isn't exclusively biological in origin. Studies show that if you're related to someone with ADHD, you're more likely to have ADHD yourself. This is often taken to suggest that ADHD has a significant biological basis, but Mate says relatives often also share the same environments, and your environment can have an equally significant impact on your psychological development. Short form note: some modern research shows that ADHD is mostly, if not entirely, genetically based, and some studies have even identified specific DNA sequences that seem to be associated with a higher risk of ADHD. Some research suggests that environmental factors, like prenatal and childhood exposure to neurotoxins such as nicotine, may be linked to ADHD, but these aren't the kinds of environmental factors Mate is pointing to. The role of genetics in ADHD. Mate says that the genetic basis of ADHD is a sensitive temperament, which predisposes you to ADHD by making you more susceptible to environmental stress. If you inherited a sensitive temperament, you're biologically primed to readily pick up on and have more intense reactions to physical and emotional stimuli. According to Mate, sensitivity can be advantageous. Since you're more attuned to the world around you, you take notice of the world's most subtle complexities, and you're given to feelings like awe, wonder, and appreciation. With those strengths under your belt, you could fill an important creative or spiritual role in society. But sensitivity can also be disadvantageous because it makes you more likely to be negatively affected by your environment. For example, Mate cites studies that say people with ADHD are more likely to have allergies, lower pain tolerance, and higher emotional reactivity. Their responses to both positive and negative emotions are just more extreme. If you're more susceptible to environmental stress, you're more likely to suffer the negative effects of stress, including the harmful impacts it can have on your developing brain. Genetic sensitivity and highly sensitive persons. Mate's description of genetic sensitivity is very similar to the idea psychologist Elaine Aron describes in her book, The Highly Sensitive Person. According to Aron, 1 in 5 people inherit a trait that makes them highly sensitive. If you have this trait, you're a highly sensitive person, or HSP. She names 3 strengths associated with high sensitivity: the ability to process information very deeply, the ability to discern subtleties better than the average person, and a high level of empathy and strong emotions. Like Mate, Aron believes that high sensitivity can be evolutionarily advantageous. She says the trait continues to proliferate because society needs people who can think and feel deeply to step up to the plate as judges, advisors, and priests, leaders whose advice the less sensitive part of the population can depend on for survival. She also notes, as Mate does, that high sensitivity has a major pitfall. Since you're so attuned to your environment, you become overstimulated more easily, which can make dealing with the demands of daily life challenging. However, experts' opinions are divided as to whether there's a relationship between the HSP trait and ADHD. Aron admits that she's not very familiar with ADHD, but she believes that the two are mutually exclusive because HSPs are generally too thoughtful to struggle with impulse control. On the other hand, at least one recent study has demonstrated that HSP traits are correlated with ADHD traits, and some psychologists have noted that HSPs are often misdiagnosed with disorders like ADHD when their sensitivity impairs their ability to function. The role of childhood stress in ADHD. Based on anecdotal evidence from his life and the lives of his patients, Mate believes that the psychosocial basis of ADHD is early childhood stress. Short form note: experts dispute the notion that ADHD is caused by social environmental factors like early childhood stress. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, most research suggests that stress may exacerbate ADHD symptoms, but it can't cause them because ADHD is something you're born with. Mate says that early childhood stress includes obvious stressors like neglect, abuse, or separation from your parents, but if you're genetically predisposed to be highly sensitive, you were probably stressed by even the most subtly negative social interactions. Your parents may have been very loving and attentive toward you, but if they were stressed themselves, your home may have had an imperceptibly tense emotional atmosphere. Your sensitive temperament gave you greater unconscious awareness of that tension. For example, on some level you may have noticed that your parents didn't smile at you often enough. As a result, you became stressed too, even if you weren't consciously aware that you felt stressed. Short form note: research affirms that people with ADHD are prone to experiencing unbearably intense negative feelings in response to subtly negative social interactions. This is known as rejection-sensitive dysphoria, RSD. If you have RSD, your brain interprets perceived or actual rejection as a serious threat to your well-being. So, for example, you may find yourself lashing out at others when you feel that they disapprove of you. While Mate argues that something like RSD is one of the factors that leads you to develop ADHD, other experts recognize RSD as a symptom associated with, rather than a cause of, ADHD. According to Mate, early childhood stress is harmful because it ruptures the parent-child bond, the set of consistently positive interactions and resulting positive feelings that occur between a parent and child. Short form note: psychologists commonly refer to the ruptured parent-child bond as insecure attachment. If you were insecurely attached to your parents, you felt that you couldn't rely on them to consistently meet your physical and/or emotional needs. How the parent-child bond affects your development. Mate explains that the parent-child bond influences your cognitive emotional development in two ways. First, consistently positive parent-child interactions produce positive feelings, which set off neurochemical processes that promote the physical growth of your brain by building new neural pathways and strengthening existing connections. On the other hand, if you don't have consistently positive interactions with your parents, you become physiologically stressed. Stress sets off a neurochemical reaction that inhibits neural growth. If you endured a lot of early childhood stress, your brain simply didn't have the opportunity to develop as it typically would. Short form note: the kind of stress that can have adverse, long-term effects on the development of your brain is known as toxic stress. This results when children are exposed to serious stressors that go unresolved for long periods of time, like abuse or dire poverty. Research indicates that other kinds of stress, including positive stress resulting from normal childhood experiences like the first day of school, and tolerable stress that results from more severe hardships but is mitigated by supportive adults, do not impede brain development. Mate argues that the neurological effects of early childhood stress can be seen most clearly in the prefrontal cortex, PFC, which studies suggest is underdeveloped in people with ADHD. The PFC is the part of your brain responsible for managing attention, impulse control, and stillness. If your PFC is underdeveloped, you lack the physiological structure needed to support typical functioning in those areas. Short form note: ADHD brains are physiologically different from neurotypical brains in at least 7 ways. This includes an underdeveloped PFC, as well as an underdeveloped cerebellum and amygdala, which have roles in the regulation of stillness, movement, and emotions, respectively. Interestingly, the hippocampus, which is associated with memory, tends to be overdeveloped in people with ADHD. Experts believe this is the brain's attempt to compensate for deficits in other areas of the brain. Second, consistently healthy parent-child interactions teach you important psychological skills, like how to manage your attention, control your impulses, and regulate stillness. For example, Mate explains that you typically learn how to pay attention by having positive interactions with your parents. You want more of the feel-good endorphins these interactions give you, so you learn to focus on your parents when they're focused on you. Short form note: in addition to affecting your attention and impulses, parent-child interactions can also affect your ability to handle emotions, starting a cycle of unhealthy parent-child relationships. In adult children of emotionally immature parents, psychologist Lindsay C. Gibson explains that when parents restrict their children's freedom to express their emotions, the children may become self-preoccupied, defensive, and psychologically limited, which in turn has an impact on their ability to nurture their children's psychological needs. Fortunately, it only takes one person to break the cycle. If you learn how to meet your own psychological needs, you can pass those skills on to your children. On the other hand, If interacting with your parents was stressful, you never got the opportunity to learn these skills. For example, Mate believes that your difficulty with attention stems from when your brain automatically dissociated your attention from the discomfort you were experiencing when your parents stressed you out. Dissociation is an automatic survival mechanism. Distress takes a physical toll on your body, so your brain protects you by dissociating from your stress. If you had enough negative interactions with your parents, inattention gradually became your baseline state. As a result, you're only able to pay attention when it's emotionally rewarding enough. Otherwise, it requires an immense conscious effort. Short form note: dissociation is not a symptom of ADHD, but people with ADHD may dissociate when they experience trauma and may be more likely to experience trauma. If you struggle with dissociation, grounding techniques that help you connect with your present reality may help. For example, one common grounding technique is to list things you can hear, smell, taste, touch, and see. New section. Part 2. You can heal your ADHD. Since ADHD results from the underdevelopment of your brain and psyche, Mate theorizes that you can heal your ADHD by leveraging brain plasticity, your brain's ongoing reactivity to environmental stimuli, to your advantage. In this section, we'll discuss the theory behind Mate's approach to healing ADHD. Then, we'll present some concrete steps you can take to promote healing in yourself and in your children. Mate's theory of healing. Mate says that doctors tend to treat ADHD like it's a purely medical problem by prescribing medication and nothing else for it. He believes that this approach is fundamentally unsuitable and calls for a more holistic plan for healing ADHD. Let's dig more deeply into his theory of healing. Short form note: medication may have been the primary treatment for ADHD in the 90s, but now, most experts recommend a combination of behavioral therapy and medication to treat ADHD in everyone over the age of 6. Medication can help, but it won't heal. Mate argues that while ADHD medication can reduce or help you cope with your symptoms, it won't heal your ADHD. That's because the source of your ADHD symptoms isn't simply a chemical imbalance. ADHD does have a chemical component. Your brain doesn't transmit dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with the regulation of attention, impulse, and stillness, in the typical way. But according to Mate, the chemical component of ADHD has deeper roots. You can't transmit dopamine appropriately because you lack the appropriate neurostructure and positive life experiences that are required for typical dopamine transmission. Since ADHD medication can't address those root causes, he says, it's not possible to heal your ADHD with medication alone. He also notes that ADHD medication isn't appropriate for everyone. Sometimes it doesn't have the desired effect, or the side effects are insurmountably harmful. It's important that your autonomy be respected when it comes to medication. If you feel it isn't helping, you shouldn't let anyone push you or your child to take it. Dopamine, ADHD medication, and healing. Experts are still divided about the role that dopamine plays in ADHD. Some research has indicated that people with ADHD have significantly lower levels of dopamine because they have a higher concentration of dopamine transporters, proteins that can negate the function of dopamine in your brain, resulting from a genetic mutation. However, other researchers suggest that dopamine doesn't contribute as much to ADHD symptoms as other brain differences do. Nevertheless, the most common ADHD medications, stimulant S like Ritalin and Adderall, work by increasing the amount of dopamine in your brain. These treatments don't work for everybody, but many people with ADHD report that taking stimulants radically changed their lives for the better. There are also non-stimulant medications available for ADHD that target other neurotransmitters and parts of the brain. If your ADHD medication isn't working for you, talk to your doctor. They may change your dosage, try a different medication, or prescribe non-drug treatment for your ADHD. Experts don't claim that ADHD medications can heal your ADHD because ADHD is widely considered incurable. No treatment, whether it's medication, behavioral therapy, or something else, will eradicate your ADHD. But ADHD medications can help you cope with your symptoms more effectively and, ultimately, live a happier life. Your brain is plastic, so change can heal it. Mate theorizes that it's best to treat ADHD by using brain plasticity to your advantage. He explains that while your brain is most plastic during childhood, it continues to be affected by environmental stimuli throughout the rest of your life. This means that it's never too late to learn the psychological skills you missed out on developing as a child, and when you do, it'll have a positive impact on your physical brain too. Over time, you can gradually overcome the negative effects of early childhood stress on your brain. Short-form note: experts say that you can proactively improve your brain's plasticity by putting yourself in novel situations. As you adapt to the change, your brain makes new neuronal connections. Example: activities include learning new skills, like speaking a language or playing a musical instrument, having new experiences by traveling to a foreign country, for example, and playing games that involve creativity or surprise. Getting enough sleep and exercise also promotes neuroplasticity. Since Mate believes that the fundamental cause of ADHD is the rupture of the parent-child bond, that's where he thinks you should focus most of your healing efforts. You can't go back in time and provide yourself with a consistently positive childhood, but you can reparent yourself as an adult by taking responsibility for your emotional wellness, learning to fulfill your own needs, and accessing the resources you need to improve. Likewise, if you're the parent of a child with ADHD, you can help them flourish by making changes that strengthen the bond you share. Short-form note: reparenting yourself is a commonly prescribed treatment for survivors of childhood trauma. According to the psychologist who invented the concept, self-reparenting works because it helps you disidentify from your parents' negative concept of you and come into your own, healthier self-concept. For example, if your parents made you feel stupid as a child, you probably feel stupid as an adult, and reparenting yourself would involve learning to see yourself in a more positive light. Self-reparenting is usually done in conjunction with a therapist who can help you identify the negative patterns you adopted from your parents and learn how to change them. Concrete steps for adult healing. So, what kinds of positive changes can you make to your life to help your adult brain heal? According to Mate, there are two essential components to reparenting yourself: pursuing psychological growth and physical self-nurturing. Let's explore some of his suggestions for healing in both of these areas. Pursuing psychological growth. Accept yourself, including your difficult emotions and any behaviors you engage in but don't necessarily approve of. Many people with ADHD struggle with self-esteem because they feel their condition holds them back from achieving their goals and getting others' approval. You may even feel like there's something innately wrong with you, which Mate attributes to the shame you felt every time the bond between you and your parents was ruptured. To gain self-acceptance, remind yourself that you're doing your best and that healing is a journey. It's okay if you're not where you'd like to be yet. Short-form note: in Radical Acceptance, Buddhist psychologist Tara Brach explains that most people struggle with self-acceptance because they feel ashamed or guilty of their mistakes. To get past these feelings, she recommends self-forgiveness, the practice of welcoming your own feelings, acknowledging the good parts of yourself, and cultivating self-compassion. Self-forgiveness helps you see yourself in shades of gray rather than black or white. You're imperfect, but that's okay. It doesn't mean you're bad. Attend therapy. Mate explains that people have a deep-seated psychological need for validation from others, especially when they're in pain. He says that a family therapist can provide you with that validation, help you understand your emotional pain, and support you in learning new psychological skills that can help you thrive. Short-form note: Mate specifically recommends seeing a family therapist because they can help you understand the generational patterns of stress and dysfunction that he says accumulated in your own ADHD. However, other experts typically recommend behavioral therapy to treat ADHD. Behavioral therapy works by teaching you skills that can help you overcome your symptoms and replace dysfunctional behaviors with healthier ones. Practice mindfulness. According to Mate, mindfulness improves your neurological capacity to focus. In addition, it may have other psychological benefits, like spiritual fulfillment, that help you heal the emotional pain that underlies your ADHD. He specifically recommends mindfulness meditation, but notes that mindfulness can be incorporated into a vast array of activities, like spending time in nature. Short-form note: some people with a history of trauma, anxiety, or depression may find that inward-looking kinds of mindfulness, such as meditation, trigger adverse symptoms instead of bringing them peace. If that's the case for you, Mindfulness practices that focus your attention on something outside of yourself, like gardening, forest bathing, or coloring, may be more helpful. Prioritize restorative recreation. Many people with ADHD overwork themselves as an outlet for their hyperactivity, but Mate says that in the long run, this only increases your stress. Instead, you should give yourself time to play, explore, and rest. For example, you might take up a creative hobby like crochet. Short-form note: in How to Do Nothing, professor and artist Jenny Odell argues that everyone should prioritize restorative recreation. She explains that although modern society demands your constant attention and productivity, it's healthy to spend some time doing nothing, that is, nothing traditionally considered productive. She specifically recommends 3 restorative recreational activities: spending time in nature, learning local history, and getting to know your neighbors. Physical self-nurturing. If you struggle with addiction to any substance or behavior, as many people with ADHD do, seek treatment. According to Mate, to effectively treat addiction, you have to understand and deal with the root of the problem, the emotional pain you're trying to cover up by engaging in your addictive behavior. Short-form note: not sure if you're struggling with addiction? There are 4 signs that generally indicate you may be addicted to a substance or behavior: inability to stop using the substance or engaging in the behavior, neglecting your relationships and responsibilities because you want the substance or behavior more, taking risks related to the substance or behavior, like sharing needles or having unprotected sex, and having physical withdrawal symptoms when you try to stop using a substance. If you check any of these boxes, it may be time to seek help. Keep a neat home. An untidy environment can add to your emotional stress. If you struggle with this, Mate recommends setting a timer for a short period of time and cleaning until it goes off. Over time, you'll make steady progress toward maintaining your environment. Short-form note: keeping a neat home can be a struggle when you have ADHD because you struggle to stay focused, especially if you find cleaning boring. To overcome your boredom, add some enrichment to your cleaning routine. Play music while you do dishes, watch a movie while you fold laundry, or call a friend while you mop. Practice good sleep hygiene. Because of your difficulty with stillness, you may have trouble relaxing enough to fall asleep at night, but Mate notes that a lack of good sleep can worsen your stress. Short-form note: some basic sleep hygiene practices include going to sleep and waking up at the same time every day, turning off electronic devices and engaging in a relaxing routine before you go to bed, and limiting caffeine to mornings, or eliminating caffeine completely. Get adequate nutrition and exercise. Your sensitive temperament means that you feel the effects of undernourishment and underexercising more strongly, which Mate says can increase stress and inhibit your progress. But your sensitivity also means that if you do get enough nutrition and exercise, you'll feel their positive effects, like stress relief, increased focus, and improved mood, more strongly. Short-form note: some studies suggest that exercise has more of an impact on your ADHD symptoms than diet does, but it doesn't hurt to tackle both. Experts say that eating food that's good for your brain, like healthy proteins, complex carbohydrates, and omega-3 fatty acids, may reduce your ADHD symptoms. Adequate exercise can have the same effect. Experts recommend 30 to 40 minutes of moderately intense activity, 4 or 5 times a week. Concrete steps for childhood healing. Mate's advice for helping a child with ADHD heal is largely the same as his advice for adults. Don't force them to take medicine if it does more harm than good, and do your best to provide the psychological and physical nourishment they need. However, children with ADHD and their parents face some unique challenges as well. Let's explore some of those challenges and Mate's proposed solutions for them. Repairing the parent-child bond. Recall that Mate believes the fundamental cause of ADHD is the rupture of the parent-child bond. Since your child is still developing, you have the opportunity to repair that rupture and strengthen the bond between you. According to Mate, the best way to do this is by cultivating and communicating an attitude of perfect acceptance of your child. If you're perfectly accepting of your child, you feel that you love, respect, and appreciate your child no matter what, and more importantly, you make sure that your child feels secure in that fact. Short-form note: like many parents, you may struggle to accept your child's ADHD diagnosis. Perhaps you feel anxious about their future, blame yourself for their struggles, or are even in denial about their diagnosis. To move toward acceptance, Experts recommend that you reflect on your feelings so you can understand them, give yourself time to grieve, and focus on your child's strengths. To show your child that you accept them perfectly, Mate recommends the following steps. Take a loving interest in your child's inner world. Try to understand what it's like to be them without trying to fix them. If your child senses that you're judgmental, anxious, or angry about what's going on with them, it can make them feel ashamed and want to pull away from you. Short form note: one concrete way to take a loving interest in your child is to focus on the meaning behind their behavior instead of the behavior itself. For example, if your teenager with ADHD has been skipping school, you might ask them why instead of immediately punishing them for it. Perhaps they're skipping school because they feel anxious about their ability to get good grades. Once you know this, you can proactively address that anxiety, which could resolve the misbehavior. Initiate quality time with your child. This demonstrates that you value their presence in your life. Short form note: in the 5 love languages, Gary Chapman explains that there are 2 kinds of quality time: a meaningful conversation about what's going on in your lives and time spent focusing on the same activity. You may not be interested in the same activities your child is, but engaging in those activities with them anyway shows that you care more about spending time with them than your own enjoyment. Avoid reactionary parenting. Mate says that your greatest priority as a parent is fulfilling your child's needs, not acting on your own emotional impulses. For example, this could mean taking time to gather yourself before you launch into a difficult discussion with your child about their school performance. If you can't regulate your emotions while you're parenting, your child may feel anxious and alienated from you. Short form note: in No Drama Discipline, parenting experts Daniel J. Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson recommend 3 strategies to help you avoid reactionary parenting. First, keep in mind that your child's developing brain doesn't support adult-like behavior yet, so you shouldn't expect them to act like adults or understand your adult point of view. Second, ask yourself about the meaning behind your child's behavior, what you want them to learn from this experience, and how to best deliver that message. Third, wait to discipline your child until you're both calm enough to have a productive discussion. Dealing with defiance. Many children with ADHD exhibit defiance, an automatic reflex where the child rejects the parent's demands, expectations, or instructions, and parents struggle to deal with that defiance without escalating the conflict. Mate explains that defiance is healthy to some extent. By defying you, your child sets herself apart as an individual, which is an important part of her development. Defiance is especially common in teenagers because it's developmentally important for them to begin feeling more independent. Short form note: if you're struggling with your child's defiance, you're not alone. Psychologists note that more than half of children with ADHD are also diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder. Mate suggests taking the following steps whenever your child is defiant. First, encourage your child to express their feelings and validate those feelings even if your child isn't going to get their way. Second, decide whether it's worth enforcing your rules in this case. Is it something trivial or a matter of their safety or well-being? Third, refuse to engage in a power struggle. It's not about overpowering or imposing your will on them, but getting your child to cooperate with you. Finally, and most importantly, after a disagreement, take the initiative to reconnect with your child as soon as possible. This reaffirms your perfect acceptance of your child. They know that no matter what they do, your relationship can't be damaged beyond repair. Short form note: in addition to Mate's tips, other experts recommend using positive reinforcement to decrease defiant behavior. This includes praising your child for good behavior, offering lots of positive attention during daily life, and creating a reward system. For example, if your child completes their chores every day for a week, they could earn extra time on the computer. Promoting achievement. Mate emphasizes that promoting achievement shouldn't be your first priority. It's not as important as the parent-child bond, and if you put achievement first, your child will internalize your anxiety/anger about their performance as shame. However, Mate also says that children with ADHD need to feel empowered to achieve whatever they want to achieve. Short form note: one way you can empower your child with ADHD to achieve is by teaching them self-advocacy skills. Self-advocacy in the context of ADHD means knowing how your ADHD impacts you, knowing what you need to overcome your ADHD symptoms, and working to meet those needs, for example, by asking for accommodations. When you teach your child to self-advocate, they learn that they're capable of independently overcoming barriers to their achievement, and studies show that they're more likely to succeed. Additionally, some experts argue that developing self-advocacy skills also improves kids' self-esteem and teamwork skills, which provides benefits outside of academic achievement, like strengthening their bond with you. He makes a couple of concrete suggestions to promote your child's empowerment. Develop your child's capacity for intrinsic motivation by giving them the opportunity to make their own choices, within reason, and letting them know that it's okay if they don't meet others' expectations for their achievement. Maté says this is better than relying on extrinsic motivation, like punishments and rewards, to encourage your child to achieve for 3 reasons. It gives the child anxiety about measuring up to your standards, increases defiance, and incentivizes the child to take the easiest route possible to achieve a desired reward, rather than incentivizing them to become genuinely invested in the task itself. Short-form note: experts note that for people without ADHD, the capacity for intrinsic motivation doesn't fully mature until your mid-20s, and that comes even later for people with ADHD. So even as you encourage your child to develop intrinsic motivation, you may still have to rely on extrinsic motivators, like rewards for good grades, to help them achieve. Maté suggests that when it comes to school-related achievement, you work together with your child's teachers to ensure that your child's ADHD-related needs are being accommodated. For example, if your child's teacher says they have difficulty staying still during class, you can collaborate to incorporate appropriate movement into their day. For example, maybe a fidget spinner. You can also collaborate with your child himself by helping him strategize about how to meet his own educational goals without pushing your own goals onto him. Short-form note: if you live in the United States and have evidence that your child's ADHD interferes with their ability to achieve in school, your child may be legally entitled to receive accommodations at school. Common accommodations for school children with ADHD include extra time on exams, tailored assignments, extra breaks for physical activity, and the elimination of environmental distractions. New section. Part 3. The Future of ADHD. Beyond healing your own ADHD, Maté says you can also play a role in the future of ADHD by preventing ADHD. In this section, we'll explore the role society plays in the prevalence of ADHD and the changes society can make to diminish it. Maté says that ADHD is preventable if you provide sensitive children with a healthy, stress-free early childhood. Instead of developing ADHD, their brains will develop typically, and they'll grow into functional adults whose sensitivity helps them excel in life, rather than hindering their progress. According to Maté, if every parent could provide this for their children, ADHD wouldn't exist. Short-form note: Maté favors preventing ADHD because he believes that ADHD is inherently detrimental. It makes life harder, so it should be eradicated. However, in recent years, activists belonging to the neurodiversity movement have argued just the opposite. ADHD is a brain difference, not a deficit, and it only seems to impair function because the world isn't set up to accommodate people with brain differences. Neurodiversity advocates don't believe that ADHD should be eradicated. Instead, they believe that society should make room for everybody to succeed. However, Maté argues that the responsibility for preventing ADHD shouldn't be left solely up to parents. No matter how earnestly you try to protect and nourish your children, you and your children are likely to experience stress that's imposed by society. For example, many low-income parents struggle to provide for their children's basic material needs through no fault of their own. If they have to work long hours to do so, they might become stressed and stress their children out too, because they're juggling too much and don't have the time or energy to establish a positive, secure relationship with their children. Short-form note: the notion that society is responsible for preventing mental health conditions has become more common recently. For example, in Lost Connections, journalist Johann Hari argues that society is responsible for preventing depression since depression is a natural reaction to the way society is set up. For example, you might be depressed because you have to keep a job you hate for the money. Arguments like these are part of a larger theory that the medicalization of social problems is an ineffective way to treat them. The idea is that medical experts pathologize and medicate dysfunction as a means to control undesirable behavior when we'd be better off addressing the social issues that contribute to people's dysfunction. Mate argues that society has a responsibility to help parents provide a safe, stable, and loving environment for their children by reducing demands on parents and increasing access to support for parents and children. For example, this could mean providing financial support to parents so they can work less and spend more time with their children. Short form note: formal family support programs aren't always easily accessible, but they're out there. For example, if you're struggling financially and live in the United States, you may qualify for a program like WIC or SNAP, which helps families afford food. You may also benefit from informal support programs, like support groups for parents of children with ADHD.